Welcome to the Design Leaders Podcast. Every day I speak with candidates who are looking to grow in the world of design, development and construction. And I also speak with market leaders at the peak of their career who regularly talk about mentorship and helping the next crop of leaders in their development. And how can you as professionals help reach their goals in a small but ever-growing industry? Each episode, I want to provide a great opportunity for professionals of all levels to learn from market and thought leaders about avenues for development, areas to focus, how to speak about their project experience, and over time, help guide other professionals in their longer-term goals and motivations. This morning, I'm here with Regal Leftwich, Vice President, Senior Laboratory Planner at CannonDesign. I first spoke with Regal about a year ago and knew immediately I was speaking to an industry and market thought leader. I'll allow him to go into his own background shortly, but for those of you who don't know Regal has spent at least the last 15 years focused in the world of lab planning with some of the most reputable firms in the world, notably Perkins & Will, Page, Smith Group, and now with CannonDesign. Regal, I really appreciate you coming on to the episode and welcome.
Thanks, Jakey. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. So firstly, Regal, I guess just for those that don't know you, how and why did you first get into architecture and design?
Yeah, it's interesting. Growing up, everyone has someone that kind of motivates them. My dad was an engineer, and my sister and brothers eventually became engineers. And then my mom was kind of more artsy, and so I didn't quite fit in the engineering, but I always have that left brain right brain connection going on, and so architecture just felt right, and it just seemed I luckily went to a high school that had a pretty good STEM program, and I was exposed early to it, and it seemed something that I was interested in, as well as like a focus on technology, which I didn't know at the time you could do both. I learned that a little later in my career. Yeah.
Interesting. I can only imagine with a family of engineers and yourself what those Sunday dinner conversations are like.
Exactly. Yeah.
But obviously, people can check you out on LinkedIn and see kind of the last 15, 16 years of your career. But giving an idea of your early career, what sector of design did you start in, and what area of design do you focus in now?
Yeah, so when I started, actually, my first few jobs while I was in school were actually at a park, and I worked at a park for a long time, and so that actually kind of helped set the stage for an appreciation of site and place and culture and things like that. And so in my first few iterations, I was exposed early on, probably my second job, or my first job right out of school, but my second architecture office. I was exposed to a project where the science planners came in, and they met with all of the end users. They went over all of the lab stuff, and it was all the stuff I thought was really cool. And they came in, did all the really cool stuff, and then left. And then I'm like, oh, and now I'm laying out the bathrooms and other stuff. And I thought, I think I want to do that. And that always impressed me, and it took a while to kind of come back to that. But I kind of lucked out with this alignment that happened right after school. Is there was the crash of the .com in the DC area, so some AOL went under, and there was a lot of tech spaces that were opening up to be renovated, and I was working at a interior design firm that did a lot of that work. So I was exposed to kind of a lot of these cool ideas that were happening in a time that was also overlapping with the Human Genome Project. And so the DC region, especially around NIH, was just booming with life science right around then. And so it was kind of right place, right time, early on in the early 2000s that all this hit. And so I went from corporate interior design to dabbling in residential, and then really to sticking it getting right in the middle of all of the laboratory work that was happening on the East Coast.
Interesting. And how did you feel about that transition from, interiors and residential into lab work and lab spaces?
I think one of the things that anytime I talk with someone who's interested in laboratory planning early on in their career, and I mean within the first few years, um, you know, you have to kind of experience design on different levels. I think before you can really focus on some of the science design, because you need to understand how the building goes together, how the different parts, the interacting with the client and things like that. And obviously you can learn that, but I think, our schools and our education for architects, if that's your way of entering in, or interior designers, is prioritizes design. And when you get into the science world, it's about functionality. And so if you haven't gotten the design bug out of your system, you're gonna kind of wake up in a cold sweat to Excel spreadsheets and databases and all of this kind of information validation we do as part of the planning process that might not seem so sexy, if you're into shaping the building in ways that you probably learned out of school. And so it's kind of this long road before you get to that part. And I think any young designer probably experiences that yeah, you are going to detail some bathrooms first, right? And that's just part of the process. And I think the advice I have for anyone maybe at any point in their career really is, you can look on the horizon to that job or the title or the role and things like that, but you really got to be enjoying the process. And if once you start enjoying the process, the other stuff starts to come, because you just kind of have fun with it. So that's my point, is to focus on the process, maybe not the end results. That's going to happen at the end, right?
Interesting. It is something I hear from many candidates I speak with. It's this kind of internal discussion about functionality versus flair and your creative flair. So I think it's something quite personal to each designer, architect, planner, of kind of where they might be ready. But in those early days, Regal, how do you think your leadership, whether it is SST or Perkins and Will or Smith Group, how do you think your leadership will have described you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something, reflecting on that and thinking about that. I think my leadership style then hasn't changed. And I think it's evolved, but it hasn't changed. And I approach something with the Zen kind of beginner's mind. And I think my leadership style has always been, walk in a room and be a sponge, and approach everything like you're doing it for the first time. And and I think there's this tendency in your career to say, oh, I've done this for 2 years, right? Oh, I'm super good at this, right? And then after you've been doing it for 5 years, you say, oh, 2 years wasn't really that much, right? And then suddenly after 10 years, you say, oh, 5 years really wasn't that much. And you keep kind of going. And I think it's, we have some really highly trained, highly skilled people entering the workforce. And it's important to remember that you're also working with people that have been in the workforce for 40 years. And obviously, there's different levels of innovation and different levels of ideas and things coming in like that. But if you enter into your career thinking you figured everything out, you're going to be surprised, right? And so I think having a leadership style, and comes from different things, but I think everyone's going to have to find their own that works for them. But for me, having that just beginner's mind at the start is something I've been able to cultivate as I get older. And and I think the leadership style is like, can I make more people with beginner's minds, right? And look at it in this way that's from pure curiosity and a new perspective. So
Interesting.
yeah.
And would you feel as though that had quite a big impact into, I appreciate you mentioned that, your leadership style might not really have changed, but do you think that mentality has had an impact into your leadership style now? And to that question, how would those employees that are in your team and kind of more junior professionals, How do you think they would describe you as a leader now?
Yeah, that's good. I stay in touch with a lot of the employees I work with, and so I think one of the things is kind of cultivating, this friendship and almost a family. And in our profession, you spend a lot of time with people traveling and in the studio working, and so I think you have to, as people evolve, uh, and I think the thing we forget, on projects or anything like that, is if it's, a long scale project, 2 to 5 years, um, people are going to advance out of their roles they're in. And, so you have this project that has an evolving team, with different people. And that's the goal, is to train someone to do your job so you can do someone else's job, right? And I think, I think, uh, just, this idea of being an architect or a designer or things like that, you kind of have different phases in your career. One might be focused on the technical, and then you start focusing maybe more on the management, right? And then, as you progress, maybe you're focused more on the thought leadership. And although the type and, the scope of what you're working on is pretty similar, your roles have changed, and your leadership style is going to have to evolve to those different ideas and uh, problem solving, uh, experiences that you might have. And so I think and some people may say one track, and some people may kind of move their career around different phases, in a firm. But I think, being somewhat fluid in how you, are able to approach your leadership style is important. So I think, that would be a great question to go back. The second part of your question, to go back and ask people I've worked with, what do you think? I don't know. I'd like to think, that everyone I talk to, um, is able to have at least, fond experiences, and say they've learned and developed their career under me, and things like that. So I'd hope, um, um, and thinking through this, one of the things I try to do, when I'm working with, uh, younger staff or mentoring staff, is, how do I get them excited about this, or how do I bring out that motivation, right? And how do I um, start to help them find meaning in what they do, and then support that. And I do get calls. Recently, someone, that I was mentoring, is now on the owner's side and was calling for a reference. And so I think I love getting calls when I hear about someone advancing their career based on something we might have had as a discussion 5 or 10 years ago. So I think, also just staying in touch, is something that's important. And maybe that's a testament to a leadership style that, doesn't really matter where you work, as long as you can, remain colleagues in the industry.
I think, especially, in an industry that's altogether not that big, but then particularly in your space of lab work and life sciences, that is so niche and specialist and small, I think that's pretty crucial, is remaining, in contact and keeping those relationships. But that makes sense. I think I like the idea of kind of mentoring someone to do your role so you can take someone else's role. I like that notion of that you put forward a moment ago. When do you feel, Regal, that you became a leader? Was there a moment that you felt, I'm leading this process, leading this project, or was it over time when you looked back and then realized I am a leader in this market at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I think it was kind of more of a surprise, when I think, when I thought I was a leader was earlier than when I actually realized I was a leader. And so I think, at some point in your career, you'll be in the middle of it, and you'll realize middle management sucks, right? Like, I'm not quite doing the work and I'm not quite in charge of the work. And so I think somewhere in there you have to say, how do I minimize this phase, right? And I think I entered that phase early thinking, oh, I'm bigger than this, right? And I think so my thinking of when I was a leader was earlier in terms of working with staff and projects and things like that. I think when I actually became a leader was when I realized people were coming to me, and I wasn't trying to do anything other than just do a good job on the project. And when people started coming to me, I started thinking, wow, this is crazy. Like, okay, like this is it, right? And it was kind of a self-reflection, like, oh, this is what a leader does, right? And it's not about the difference between a manager and a leader. Like people are following you and they're coming to you, and you've built a team, and suddenly you realize, oh, okay, like whether the team directly reports to me or it's a team from associate firm or things like that, you've built something. And that's when once you do that, that's when you realize with people and then with ideas is you start to say, oh, now people in the market are coming to me. And that's when you start to realize like you're a leader. And I think in our world of content and building your social proof in a market, there's a lot of self uh, I guess you have to advocate for yourself. And I think it's almost, you can have this fake it till you make it kind of attitude, that, oh, I'm gonna learn about this, right? And I don't have time to do this for 30 years before I become a market leader. Like, I'm gonna figure out what makes the market tick. um, and I think there's a time when you realize, oh, I'm working with people who've been doing this for 50 years, right? And I'm nowhere near, I don't have the experience they have. But you start to think, I have different experiences, right? And you put yourself out there, and then at some point people start coming to you, if you've been doing it long enough. Um, and hopefully it's not 50 years, but I think each generation kind of rotates, and you're bringing different things to the table. And what we do as architects and engineers, we're actually creating these cultural um, you know items, like, as buildings, right? And everyone's different, so everything's a prototype in a sense. We're not mass producing things, we're customizing it. And in that sense, um, you know the leaders 5 years ago might have lost something, because what we did 5 years ago isn't what we do now. And in terms of ideas, in terms of, especially in health and in science, of how fast the technology and the ideas and the ways of working are evolving, right? And especially with the younger workforce that's entering. There's a new math. They've never, they're not even from the century, or millennia we were, like, there's this evolution, and you have to realize that uh you know if you don't evolve, you're going to be stuck. So that might be a long-winded answer for your question. Yeah.
But as a recruiter, there's nothing more I enjoy than open-ended questions that kind of, deliver in, open-ended responses, because we get a real good insight into, how you're thinking and what you're thinking in general. So no, that makes sense. Speaking of those leaders that maybe have lost something, what's something that you've taken on board from a previous leader in your career that, still sticks with you today?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things, we get involved in what we do, to a sense that we almost start living in our own created reality. And it's oh, design's the most important thing. And sometimes you lose sight of the client. in a sense that you think, oh, we're trying to do this, we want to get in this magazine, or we want to win an award, or things like that. Um, that's easy to get wrapped up into in the design world. And I think one of the things early on, I had a mentor that he cut out the photos of the end users of the building and hung them up. And that really stuck with me, that in the end you have to remember who's actually going into these spaces, right? And for them to be functional. And so every project I start, I get whether if I can find it on the web or somewhere, but I get faces, I put them up, and I make sure that when I get out of bed, that I remember that these projects that you work on for years, they do have someone that will occupy it. And that's what we need to be thinking about, because in the end, whether we like it or not, engineering architecture, it's a service industry, and we're here to really serve the client. And so I think having that compass of just remembering who it is, that gets you excited and get you out of bed, just to focus on that and remember that that's what this is for, and all the decisions you make need to be in their interest as an advocate for what they do.
Sure. I think it's an interesting way to really think about the end user of the space that you're creating. And next, Regal, it could be that leader that you're describing there, or it could be someone else. And I'm going to kind of, ask you to hone in on one. But who is a quality former leader of yours, former mentor of yours that you always respected, still respect to this day, and why?
Yeah, it's hard to name them all, because I think over time there's been a lot. I think I could start with a high school drafting teacher, or some of the first things, some mentors, or some college professors, and some of my first careers. I think in terms of lab, becoming a lab planner and focused on laboratory design, and I wouldn't be where I am, I think, without some of the leadership from my first role as a lab planner. And there's two mentors I've had there, I think, um, that have advocated for me, that have been really well. But I'd say, and I'm friends with, still to this day. But I'd say David McCullough and Chris Cowensage, from my SST days, they really were focused on growing staff and growing their careers, and focused on becoming the next them. And so I think that's been extremely important to have them, and remain to have them in my lives, as someone that is an advocate and supports me, even though we may be at different companies now and things like that.
I think they'll both be very happy to hear that when they inevitably this gets shared online, and then hopefully they see it. I'm sure they'll be very happy to hear. Listen, that's kind of going over your own development and your own growth in your career. I'm going to move on to design now, Regal, and kind of more of a hypothetical, open-ended question again. If you could design or build anything you wanted, money not being an option, what would you work on?
I know exactly what it would be. It would be a cabin. It would be a net zero, maybe Earthship, some kind of thing like that. And so I'm so close to being able to work on something like that. I can feel it. But it would be that, or making my own sailboat. I don't know, one or the other. But it would be heavy carpentry related. Yeah.
Interesting. So pretty far cry away from designing laboratories and life sciences spaces.
Yeah.
But in that world of lab work and life sciences spaces, what's the favorite project of yours that you've been a part of, and what was your role on that project?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, the question, what's your favorite one? It's the next one. You know, I've had a lot of great experiences from projects that won Lab of the Year to other awards, and I think that's a testament. But I think sometimes the testament's just how the end user really enjoys it. But it's always nice to have your peers recognize your work. But I think usually, and I think some current projects with my team have been just so rewarding, because we've been able to kind of work in a really flat hierarchy that focuses on living-centered design. And so we're thinking about the community, we're thinking about the users, we're thinking about the environment, all of this process. And so a recent project that we're wrapping up is with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and it's a 14-story laboratory building in downtown Philadelphia that focuses on pediatric research. And so you align these wonderful users that are just focus on ending childhood disease, and you've got this really clear mission. You've got a really complicated site. It was a planned to be a hotel, and they poured foundations for a hotel. And then in COVID, they pivoted and they said, maybe we can repurpose this site and make it a lab building. And so, it's a new building, but it had all these constraints for what was planned to be a hotel. And so that was challenging. And I think the team has come away with this beautiful design for it. It's on the Schuylkill River, so it'll be a monument, and it's a transition between an urban framework and then a residential framework. And so the buildings had to respond to concerns like that. So the whole community's been involved. It's been an interesting process in terms of what we've accounted for and thought about in those senses. But the project will be nice, but I think the relationships from the team that have come out of it have been amazing. And like the team I work with, they can do anything now. Like, after doing a fast-paced, high-rise, challenging project like that. So I'm happy. I think the next project is going to be the next one with the team that is really enjoyable.
Interesting. You sound particularly passionate about that project, and I imagine a project like that is something that's quite noteworthy, quite reputable. You mentioned kind of the communities involved there, so I imagine that's something that you spend quite a lot of time talking about and working on. What's something that you don't get to talk a lot about? A project that you've worked on, or something in your career that you don't get a chance to talk about a lot, but you would like the chance to talk about a little bit more?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. So I'm an artist,
Nice.
and I have a website, regalartist.com, REGAL, artist.com, and I've in grad school. I had a focus on history and theory of architecture, focused on science and technology, and the theory of science. And that was at McGill University. And part of my thesis involved creating these charcoal sketches. And one thing led to another, and the Montreal winter got so cold that I couldn't use charcoal indoor. It was just too messy and things like that. So I developed a process for adding pastel and charcoal to a canvas that didn't create any dust, and that had to do with linseed oil and creating this thing. And I applied a patent for it. It's called pastel injected oil painting, or PIOP. But so I kind of generated this new way of working for painting, and I went through these kind of this cool arc of working through architectural issues in an abstract form. And so my art was a way to kind of look at some of the geometries behind a building and take those apart. And eventually I went into doing some portrait art, which was focused on this medieval concept of moving around the city and having different perspectives, as opposed to the kind of more traditional framework of a perspective projection. And so, I'm always kind of experimenting with, the ideas of the framework of pre-reason, pre-scientific with post-scientific as a theme.
Interesting. I tell you what, when I asked that question, I'm not sure the response. I'm not sure what I'm expecting, but I'll be totally honest, I wasn't expecting that. I think we'll definitely share that website when we release this episode. But just for anyone who might not have had a chance to see that artwork behind, would you just be able to show that artwork once again? Interesting stuff. Appreciate that. But yeah, I guess we'll have a chance to see that on the website.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
It's a lot bigger than I thought it was, with you kind of close to the camera there. Interesting, that, Regal. Moving on now from design and kind of looking at your future motivations and your future goals, and also touching on previous ones as well. When you first started out, let's talk, moving away from the commercial interiors and residential, when you first kind of got into this lab space work, what were your goals? Have you achieved them, and how have they changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea with going in, with this beginner's mind, right, is some of my goals were just, how can I learn as much as possible? And, I feel like, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, like of being exposed to science, is I will never, know everything, right? And in terms of what's new, what's cutting edge, things just keep evolving. And so I think part of it was, can I become a master of the domain, right? And that was a goal. And I think I've outlined it enough to know how to be flexible, how to accommodate future changes in technology, and adapt to it in a way, research that would really help researchers, in their day-to-day practice. I think so I think that was kind of a goal, was, oh, can I become an expert of this? Can I become really good? And I think, my background with history and theory, I think it's been, cataloging all the lab buildings I work on, and understanding and benchmarking, and, coming up with this almost scholastic way of looking at the process, is a part of, like, the idea of, I guess, craft and scholarship in what we do. And so I think, I think as I move, what my goals are, have changed a little bit. And I think, my goal, or my big idea now would be, like, can I run a practice in a way where, the top researchers in the world call me up, for advice. And, that's kind of where I want to be, at some point. I want to work with the top researchers, in the world. We want to support them as much as we can. I think, we've all witnessed the power of science when it all focuses together to solve world problems. And so, now I think I want to focus on the big things, and, have as much impact as I can, and help really support science, and, the creation of knowledge for humanity.
Interesting. Well, one of my questions was going to be, your next goal was for the next stage of your career, but it sounds like you've got the kind of roadmap mapped out there. One thing that more junior professionals will want to hear, because not everything is roses and sunshine. There will be dips and kind of moments in your career that haven't necessarily been as I said, sunshine. So what's something that you either failed at, or something that you didn't achieve in your career that still sticks with you to this day?
I'm sure there's a lot of things here. Like, probably selective memory is not working. Yeah, I think so. I think it gets back to maybe some of my earlier days where, I think maybe some of my biggest failures, which were noticeable, had to do with some of my earlier work. And, as the way the industry works, we'll work on a project for 2 years, design it. It'll take 2 to 3 years to build it. And then you'll see what actually got built, right? And then after that, a year into occupancy, maybe sooner, you'll get feedback if something didn't work right. In terms of layout, in terms of did it accommodate the people or the equipment or the processes, right? And I think I made some mistakes by just not understanding the space, and because of that lag, I ended up having done several buildings with layouts that I realized, oh, this isn't the best way to do it. But that was 2 years ago, and I know it'll come out 3 years from now. And so I think there's this kind of and some of those were realizing, I guess to identify it, it was, really the relationship between how people use the space and showcasing it and making things public. And at the time, I think that may not have been important, but then I understood how important it became in terms of creating world-class laboratory spaces. And I think that was kind of the biggest aha moment. And it made me much more critical of everything I did after that. Yeah, so seeing what actually gets built 5 years later is always a surprise. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think, people will have mistakes, troubles, failures every day. And I think hearing that, you might have had some of them as well in your early careers, and then seeing where you're at now will hopefully, inspire someone to learn from their mistakes and perhaps be critical of their mistakes and kind of develop in that sense. So I think that'll be really helpful. But on that sense of kind of advice to others, we're going to kind of move into advice to industry professionals now. And I'm sure, Regal, that you look at a lot of resumes for your team, and I'm sure when you get sent them. So what's something that you would want to see from a top candidate on that resume?
Yeah. I think resumes are really difficult. I think resumes, kind of get you in the door. And obviously when, in my role, what I'm looking for is focused work in science and technology work, right? And so that's one thing. What I'm interested in is how quickly someone can learn, and how someone works as a team member, and how someone collaborates, and how interested and passionate they are about what they do. So I have to weigh that, because there are people that have never been able, to work in this field, or maybe are interested in moving into it from a previous role, that, I don't want to pass over, because they have the skills or determination, or, especially, cleverness and creativity, are attributes that just sometimes don't come out on a resume. So, and everyone realizes when you're writing a resume, you're gonna frame the experience as best you can, and that's it. But I think what we definitely look for when we're judging a candidate is how they think on their feet, their process. Are they thinking about things, especially motivation. And I think this is the key, right? Is is this person really motivated and passionate about what they're doing? And if you go to an interview and you talk about what you're passionate about, and and it aligns with what the role is, that's a win, in my mind.
But again, moving on there into the interview, you can hear that, passion, motivation, someone who's essentially going to be a sponge. That's what you want to see in that interview. What don't you want to see? What are some mistakes that you've seen in the past that you think it might be important for candidates to be aware of?
Well, I'm like a pushover. I don't believe in the first impressions are the only impressions. I know people are nervous. I know people, stutter. I know people, say I say all the time. There's some mannerisms and things like that, and anxiety, especially if you're younger staff and you've never had interviews before. That just shows the importance of training and things like that. But hopefully you get the job you want, you never have to interview again, right? So is it a skill you need to develop? It will be, in the role where you interview with clients. And so there's different levels, and I think there's different levels of neurodiversity that are interested in science. And so I think some of the rules of thumb about what a well-rounded candidate are, I think may still apply. But I do think we're always looking in all types of employees, all types of candidates, because everybody brings something to the table. And so I think having personality, owning your personality and especially passions are the keys. So I think, the opposite of that is probably the biggest mistake in my mind.
Interesting. I think there'll be a lot of people out there finding that quite helpful when they next go for any interview, or particularly if they're interviewing with you, Regal. Thinking about the industry in general, obviously it's changed a lot since you first started to now. How do you see it changing over the next kind of 5 to 10 years or so? What are some, big, highlighting points that you see the industry changing over the next decade or so?
Well, I see a lot of our senior level generation. There'll be retirements coming up, and maybe 3 to 5, 5 to 10. So I think we're going to be seeing, as baby boomers retire and Gen X and millennials take more leadership positions. I think we're gonna be seeing different types of teaming relationships, different types of hierarchies in terms of how we work. Definitely the pandemic has really changed, the speed at which we can do remote work. And it was probably going to happen in 10 years anyways. But all the technology's there, all the support's there. Our company is still, fully remote. We go in when we need to, but we realize now, you don't go in the office to do heads down work. You go in to train, you go into mentor, you go in to collaborate, and that's what we focus on. And so you want to work at home from your desk. That's perfectly fine. And I think we're going to see more of that, and we're going to want to be hiring people, and it doesn't matter where they live, because we want the best talent. It doesn't mean they have to commute in to be part of the company, right? So I think we're going to see more of these kind of relationships that are at a distance. I think in the industry, we're going to see, and we're already seeing it, is talent shortage. And so I'm sure, with what you do, you see it all the time. And so I think there's a focus on attracting and retaining the best talent. And I think companies have to change some of the status quo on what they think retaining the best talent means, and focusing on programs and on career paths that really are helping build and motivate people. And I think in terms of that talent shortage, is we also want to focus on non-traditional architects and designers and engineers, right? And people that have come up through the trades or technical colleges, and utilize the best minds out there, not just because they've had a certain career path, but talent is talent, right? And that's what we're looking for. So I think there's going to be more focus on results than pedigree, in that sense, if that makes sense, for staffing.
I think, whilst that talent shortage isn't what we're all looking for out there, it is one of the reasons why I'm in a job, and to be able to find those the lack of talent that might be out there, or kind of the shortage of talent that might be out there, particularly in your very niche space there. You just started talking about Canon and the work structure there, and kind of the supportive, flexible nature there. I think there's a lot of firms out there that aren't taking that approach, and I think they'll somewhat get left behind. But is there anything in particular about Canon? Because this episode will go to a lot of professionals that might be looking for a new opportunity. They might be open to hearing about something. Is there anything in particular about Canon that you'd like to put across for future candidates to think about and hear?
Sure. Yeah, we so I've had the benefit of being able to work at a lot of different firms across my career, and so there's a lot of interesting things going on, and every firm has its own culture and its own directives, and CannonDesign has really been an interesting company in my mind, and it's one I wasn't really familiar with earlier in my career. But CannonDesign is a design-focused company. It's about 100 years old. It started in New York, and has grown since then. But I think the thing that's interesting is the way everyone at the company is focused on living-centered design and on a kind of hypothesis-focused approach to design. And what we do differently is we're focused on designers. And so it's not just architects, it's not engineers. We have, a board of directors that, there's less architects and engineers than there are, HR and planners and different, staff in different career roles. And so it's really about creating a company that approaches design differently than a normal architecture firm. And so we've got an arm called MD Plus that does modular construction. And so, it's interesting. A traditionally A&E firm owns a modular construction company. And one of the things, our core team has figured out is, to scale a company in architecture, there's kind of a set path. You can only grow so fast. And so we're also looking at ways to scale the company in ways that make profit at rates higher than what an architecture firm might do. And so we also have a software side. We have a facilities optimization group. And so we have all of these components and a consulting side called Blue Cottage that focuses on strategy and high-level things that are just bigger than an architecture project. And so what's different about it is being able to work with all these experts from across the field and getting an understand. And it really kind of starts jumpstarting careers in the sense that, oh, I didn't know about that. Like, oh, we can think bigger, or we could do things differently. So, I would let people know that it's an interesting company. If anyone's interested, I'd be happy to talk more, or, there's other people, if there's a focus. But the idea is it's almost the kind of like, tech mentality of move fast and break things, right? Is if you want to try something, we'll try it, and we'll support staff to do it. And, that's the thing that's really interesting, because I think architecture is evolving, and the architect's role is evolving, and who architects are and contribute is evolving, right? And so we want to be nimble and evolve with all of those concepts.
Absolutely. It's something I hear quite commonly as well. I think, listen, Regal, I think if anyone else wants to hear more about Canon, underneath this episode, when we share it, we will share your LinkedIn, we will share your Canon profile. We'll, of course, also share your website for your great art. That's the advertisement behind your head over there. But that is all we've got time for this morning. So absolutely, really appreciate you coming on here, Regal. And if anyone does want to connect with Regal, his LinkedIn information will be underneath when we share this podcast. So Regal, really appreciate your insight. I'm sure there's thousands of candidates out there that will appreciate it too. And thank you for being a guest on the Design Leaders podcast.
Well, thank you, Jakey. I appreciate it.